guys, it's Will here, and this is something different I'm going to do because, like I say, there's no predictions that's going to be coming out anytime soon. So I thought I'd put a couple of videos out, just some things that you might find interesting, you might not, and I want to hear your guys' opinion, and I want to hear what your favourite fights of all time are. So in this video here, my top 10 MMA fights of all time. So, like I say, this is a very kind of subjective topic because it is my favourite fights, my top 10 favourite fights. So some people have completely different fights. But like I say, if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, and you'll be notified when videos come online. Give it a thumbs up. Hope everybody's staying safe with this pandemic that's going on around the world. It's pretty crazy at the minute. You can't really do anything. I can see some of you guys in the chat there. Jay, what's up, man? I'll try and get to some of the things at the end there. But, like I say, this is going to be my top 10 MMA fights all time. This is my personal favourite list. But like I say, I want to know what your guys' favourite fight is, or some of the fights that maybe should have made my top 10. But like I say, these are my favourites, and I'm going to kind of go through them one by one here. I think I'm going to start from, I'll go 10 to number 1. Starting off at number 10 is a fight that took place at UFC on Fuel 8 in March of 2013, and it was between Wanderlei Silva and Brian Stann. Great action fight, a lot of blows were thrown. I thought that was probably the best, maybe probably the best that Wanderlei Silva kind of looked in the UFC. He had an opponent that was willing to really stand in there and just give Wanderlei Silva the fight he wanted, and ultimately that kind of ended up being his kind of undoing, being his detriment in that fight, and ultimately getting knocked out, and Wanderlei come out there with a big win there. And it's a fight that I go back and watch. It's actually been a little bit since I went back and watched it, but when I was doing this list I thought I'll go back and kind of go over the fight again and just watch it, and it's just a really good fight. And it's crazy to think that that was 7 years ago. When I look at this list here, there's so many fights going back 8, 9, 10 years, just ones that resonate with me and ones that I watch all the time. But at number 10, Wanderlei Silva against Brian Stann is the first one in here. Number 9, January 2016, UFC 195 for the UFC welterweight championship when Robbie had the belt there. It was Robbie Lawler against Carlos Condit, and just a back and forth brawl where both guys just really went at it, gave it their all, and it was just a very close fight up until the final bell. Some people, I remember at that time being around on Twitter, and people thought Condit won that fight, Robbie Lawler won that fight. I kind of thought Carlos Condit won it, if I'm being honest with you, but it was so close that it was hard to really kind of come out and really stamp on who you thought won that fight. For me, I kind of edged it for Carlos Condit, but it was hard to really take away from Robbie Lawler. It was just such a close fight. It was one that I had friends in the attendance at that fight there, and they said it was just a complete buzz of a fight. It was an amazing fight to be there live to watch. So, number 9, Robbie Lawler against Carlos Condit, UFC 195. Number 8, UFC on Fuel 3 in May of 2012, the Diamond Dustin Poirier against the Korean Zombie Jung, where that was just ultimately a great fight where, I mean, it was just so back and forth. Zombie had points where he was really kind of laying the kind of law down on Dustin Poirier, but Poirier just being the complete, just a monster himself, kept himself in the fight, but ultimately you had the Korean Zombie coming out on top there with a beautiful, beautiful submission. A fight, like I say, that I cannot believe that it was so long ago. You've got guys, really, that when was that, like a Darce choke, I remember? Yeah, it was a Darce choke. And I just remember just watching Jung just, I mean, you have to go back and watch that fight. If you're new to the sport and you've maybe never watched some of these fights that I've maybe mentioned, go back and watch one like Wanderlei, because they are, if you're not, like I say, if you're a new fan, these fights they'll give you a total buzz, especially now when there's no fights on. Who knows when the next fight we're going to get? It could be months before we even have fights again. I think we're going to be like maybe 6 weeks before we get fights, maybe May, but we'll wait and see. But number 8 on my list there is the Diamond Dustin Poirier against the Korean Zombie. Number 7, I think a lot of people probably think this should be higher on the list, and it might be a lot of people's number one fight, honestly. But like I say, my list, this is kind of how I'm going with it. I've got Forrest Griffin against Stephen Bonner, the tough one finale, April of 2005. This fight's coming on to be 15 years old. That to me is crazy. It's the fight that pretty much changed the UFC's fortunes and really moved them in, kind of into the upper tier of kind of sports. And it was just, both guys wanted it at that point. Like I say, they put everything into the season. The fight was everything all in the line. The contract, the money, they went back and forward. It was very, very close. I edged it for Griffin. And it's just an all-out brawl. I think people in the comment section will probably disagree with me having them at number 7, but that is my number 7 there. Number 6, UFC 206, December of 2016. Cub Swanson against the Korean Superboy Do-Ho Choi. Like I say, I can't really go over and say it because most of these fights are back and forth brawls, absolute momentous fights that you cannot get bored of watching. You really can't. It's absolute tear up. Both guys gave that everything in that one. I thought a lot of people thought after that fight that Choi was really going to go on and really be a contender in that division, and he's kind of petered out, to be honest with you. He's not been the fighter since that fight. He's one of those fighters that his chin's kind of been found out a little bit, and you can knock the guy out pretty much. You can hurt him as well. So maybe that fight completely took away a load of his durability and so on. But yeah, Cub Swanson's still around the UFC, still a very much established name, kind of at the tail end of his career. But it's a great, great fight. Go back and watch it if you've not watched it before, or even if you haven't watched it in a while, go back and watch it. But my number 6 is Cub Swanson against Do-Ho Choi. Number 5, November of 2011. This was on a Friday night because the next one of the fights that I've got further up on my list was the night after. So it was a complete weekend of great, great fights, great, like, all-time top 10 fights of all time. We've got Eddie Alvarez against Michael Chandler from Bellator 58. Like I say, a war, an absolute war with two of the most kind of high caliber lightweights that Bellator will ever have in their division. They really put Bellator on the map with that type of fight. And both guys have kind of went on to do different things in their career, but be massive names within the organisation. Alvarez obviously moved over to the UFC, became UFC champion. Chandler became multiple-time Bellator lightweight champion. He's on his last fight of his contract. He wants to fight it out, and then we maybe see him come to the UFC. Even though he's always been a kind of Bellator guy, he might stick around there. I'd love to see him in the UFC. I think you can match him up with some great fighters in there and make some good fights. But my number 5, Eddie Alvarez against Michael Chandler. My number 4 is Dan Henderson. This was the night after Bellator 58, UFC 139 against Mauricio Shogun Rua. And I remember I did not watch this fight live. I was moving house at this point and couldn't watch it anyway. I was staying at my in-laws and couldn't watch it. But I kind of, social media wasn't as rife as what it is now, but I went back and I had some messages from people saying you have to watch this fight. So later on in that Sunday night, I got on and watched this fight and my jaw just dropped to the floor. Could not believe what I was seeing. Both guys were just absolutely swinging bombs. There was blood everywhere. There was massive power shots landing, and just no guy in that fight had any quit in them whatsoever. And yeah, it was just, after those two fights, I mean, they're in my top 5. So anytime I get an opportunity to kind of watch those fights, I will go back and watch them. But my number 4 is Dan Henderson against Shogun Rua, UFC 139. Number 3, John Jones, Alexander Gustafsson, UFC 165 in September of 2013. It's kind of crazy to think it's coming on 6.5 years since that fight took place. Probably the greatest, I think, probably title fight, UFC title fight we've probably ever had. There's a lot of things coming out of that fight, especially after the fight. People were saying John Jones wasn't taking it serious. It seems to be that he really wasn't, but Alexander Gustafsson kind of stepped up to the plate, really took it to John Jones when nobody was really doing that in that division. He was blowing through guys. Gustafsson gave him problems. You ask some people, they think Gustafsson won that fight. I still think John Jones just did enough, but there's people that will have an argument over Alexander Gustafsson absolutely won that fight. And I think it's getting put into the UFC Hall of Fame this year. Absolutely warrants going into the UFC Hall of Fame for one of the best fights ever. And you can never get bored of that watching that fight. Number 2, Robbie Lawler makes his appearance in the top 3, the top 10 again. UFC 189, July of 2015 against Rory MacDonald. This one will always hold a very kind of dear part in my heart because I was in the MGM Grand watching that card at UFC 189, and really that card had started off slow, and as it got towards the main card, it really started to pick up pace, and you had Pickett and Almeida, you had Jeremy Stevens, Dennis Bermudez, and it was insane knockouts, and the buzz in that building at that point was obviously momentous because Conor McGregor was fighting, he was at the top of his pomp at that time, he was huge, but then you had in the co-main event, you had Robbie Lawler defending his welterweight championship against Rory MacDonald in the second time they fought, and this fight just had everything. You had no guy backing down, there was blood everywhere, there was cuts, there was lips cut open, there was noses busted, it was an absolute war, and being in the crowd, it was a mix. There was a lot Irish there, obviously a lot American, there was Canadian fans round about me, and it was just, it felt like everybody was coming together as an MMA fan and just completely enjoying that fight. And I sit back here and think about it now, what the fans at home must have been like. It was just, as an MMA fan, you were just engrossed in that fight. And an incredible fight that I watch all the time, and I still think about it like when I'm going to work, and it just pops into my head, and I'm thinking, I was so blessed and honoured to kind of be there at that fight. But yeah, my number 2 is Robbie Lawler against Rory MacDonald, UFC 189. And the number 1 fight for me, my favourite fight of all time, and I'm seeing some guys taking a guess and they are thinking what it is, and some of the fights that I've left out there, what you're saying is an honourable mention fight. But my number 1 fight comes from April 2010, WEC 48, Leonard Garcia against the Korean Zombie is my favourite fight, and I watch this fight probably every week throughout the year. When I get a bit of downtime, I just sit and watch that fight, and it was the fight I remember watching in 2010 that literally had me out of my seat. I could not shut up about the fight afterwards. I could not stop telling friends that you need to watch this fight. It is an absolute all-time great fight if you're an MMA fan. There's a lot of probably new fans that have come in the last 5 to 6 years that have never ever seen this fight. If there's a new guy that's coming into the sport, a new fan that's coming into the sport, I always say, like, this is the fight you should watch. You cannot get bored of watching this fight. It's just an absolute war of a fight. Both guys got damaged with own kind of recognition in that fight, and I get goosebumps even talking about it. But that is going to be my number 1 fight. WEC 48, Leonard Garcia against the Korean Zombie, and then in the rematch in the UFC, we seen the Korean Zombie with some more history by pulling off a twister against Leonard Garcia. But all-time great back and forth fight that I think should be in the Hall of Fame in the UFC. They put fights in there. So yeah, I seen Edgar versus Maynard there. That would be an honourable mention fight. I've got some fights here that I've got in the honourable mentions that I really probably should put out there. So one of my personal favourites is Liddell against Wanderlei Silva, UFC 79. I've been waiting for that fight for so long, watching Pride, watching the UFC. It wasn't kind of close, but it was just a fight I always wanted to see, and I'm gassed up watching it. Gastelum against Adesanya, UFC 236, had everything. Takanori Gomi against Nick Diaz at Pride 33, just an amazing fight to go back and watch. Justin Gaethje against Michael Johnson, the tough finale, is another one that I love to watch regularly. Justin Gaethje got wobbled a few times, kind of eventually got going, and then Michael Johnson started to wilt to the pressure. Tony Ferguson against Edson Barboza is one that I love watching. And another one that I really like is Roger Huerta against Clay Guida. I think that was way back in 2010. And then you've obviously... I like the McGregor-Diaz fight, the second one. Great fight. So, like I say, guys, that's my top 10 fights, my personal top 10 favourite fights of all time. I want to know what your top 10 is. I want to know what your number 1 fight that you go to. If you were to tell a new fan coming in to watch the sport, what fight would you tell him to go watch? It's just, a great fight. Great fights, and you cannot really get bored watching any of those fights whatsoever. I think tomorrow I'm going to make another video, and I'm going to make it my top 10 upsets of all time. I've got a list here. I've got half the list done already. I'm going to kind of go over the rest of the list tonight and make my top 10, and that's probably going to come out tomorrow night. Just a little bit extra if you guys want to sit and watch me talking about some of my personal favourite fights, and then my personal top 10 upsets of all time. So guys, appreciate you in the chat there. Hit the thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and if you want some content. I'm always making UFC predictions. I have been for many years. This is just something different to kind of keep us going while there's going to be no fights for a little bit. And if you've got any suggestions on what I should be maybe talking about, top 10 fights, or even whatever it may be, top 10 biggest upsets, it's going to be tomorrow, but like top 10 knockouts, top 10 submissions, top 10 wow moments of the UFC, whatever it may be, let me know, and I will make a list for it and make a video for it. So until next time, guys, appreciate it, appreciate you, all the best, stay safe, and all the best. Take care.